Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and let's do this morning, huh? I'm doing this actually first thing in the morning. I haven't actually even eaten breakfast, and I'm doing this as sort of an experiment. And I was feeling really good until just a second ago. I started feeling hungry. So let's see how this goes. All right. I'm just letting you know that this is, this is what the status is here as we're recording here at the studios of Art Burns Coaching. But anyway, welcome, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful moment as you're listening to this, as you're watching this. I hope you're feeling grounded. I hope you're feeling adaptable, and I hope you're feeling in touch, not just with yourself, but in touch with everything that's going on around you, right? I hope that you're showing up in this way. So welcome. Yesterday I did a Casual Fridays episode on active listening, and I'm really excited, but I realized at the end of the episode, I had actually just done an episode on active listening like 4 weeks earlier. So, we'll see how that goes. I think it's really funny. But here I am talking about showing up to life. Now, in the last few episodes here, on 2 out of the last 3, for some reason I did an episode in the middle about being happy like a rock star. But the one before that was about kindness, and the one after that was about empathy. And so when we practice kindness and empathy, and when I say practice, I always mean that when we practice towards building a skill, right? A lot of times I think it sounds like when I'm saying practice, and that it's always a practice and that it's all about practice, right? I think sometimes people feel like, oh my gosh, does this mean I got to practice? I got to do this stuff for my whole life? It seems like so much work. But the thing to understand, and this really importantly applies to kindness and empathy, is that when we do this practice, now I took a course with Dan Siegel like 5 years ago before I was even doing this, when I was preparing to do this as my work, right? And, for me, it was important to be, certified and kind of have some information from some authority, not authority, but some, legitimate, people out there, right? Published people and doctors and stuff like that. And so for me, it was very important to attend a lot of, webinars and seminars and classes and reading the books and all that, right? And so Dan Siegel was one of those people who I really gravitated to very early on. And I was in a webinar with him, and he said something during that really, it struck a note in my heart that was like, this is it. Like, this is so important. And what he said in this webinar is that, when we do meditation practice, right? Now, that could be any meditation practice, including the practices of kindness and empathy and compassion, but also including just attention training and just pausing and checking in with our body, our emotions, our thoughts, which these are all the practices that I teach, right? And what he said is that when we do these practices, we attain a state of being during the practice, right? If you go into meditation, you enter that meditative state, right? When you practice kindness, you're coming into a state of being kind, right? But what happens is and Dan is talking from and this was also very important for me, that it not be just a spiritual thing. For me, it had to be rooted in science. That's just what was really calling for me. And Dan is very much a scientist. He is not a woo-woo guy at all, okay? And so when we're talking about, I want you to understand that, because from his point of view, he's talking about, neurological development, right? Which is, not to digress, but we're always developing for our entire lifespans. There's no point at which we're done developing, right? And this is important to understand, because as we do these practices, we develop around these practices on a neuronal level. And so what happens then is that we go from this state of meditation, or this state of, awareness, open awareness, or this state of kindness, empathy, and compassion. And then we take, as we continue to do the practice, the neuronal, development takes that state and brings it to a trait. Now, these are Dan Siegel's words, but essentially what he's saying is that it becomes who we are. It becomes the very essence of us, is to be focused in our attention, to be present, and to be open in our awareness, to be non-judging, to be kind, to be empathic, to be compassionate. And so it becomes, so I want to assure you that it is by far absolutely not the kind of thing where this is a labor that just is daunting and backbreaking through the rest of your life. It's nothing like that. It's actually the opposite. After a little while of doing the practices, you realize that you're just being this. You're not really doing anything anymore. It's just you're just living moment to moment. And you find yourself, and this is the really exciting point for everyone who I see go through this, and myself included, that you get to a point where it's like you see yourself doing something almost like you're watching yourself in a movie or something. And it's like, whoa, look at how well I'm handling this. And it's amazing. So, getting back to the kindness and the empathy, specifically when we're practicing kindness and empathy, and again, as we do it for even just a few weeks, it becomes the nature of who we are. And as that happens, as we become more naturally and more automatically and habitually more, empathic and more kind, what happens is that these become what I like to call an equanimity, right? That we show up in the moment as this person, right? As with this quality to us, right? Now, again, as I often, always really say at some point, there's sort of two phases of this work, or two areas in which this work happens, right? That there's the internal place, right? Of the focus of the attention and the openness of the awareness and the non-judgingness of that awareness, the ability to be grounded in the present moment and to be accepting and to be letting go of any, ideas that I was clinging to and stuff like this, right? This is all internal work, 100% internal. Now, it impacts the external because it's how you're showing up, as we talk about in the Showing Up to Life podcast, but it's all internal work. When we go into kindness and empathy and compassion, which I'm going to get to in a second, this is where we're shifting into an interpersonal, right? We're shifting into the outside world, right? How we interact and interface with that outside world is where the kindness and compassion and empathy is that's where that work applies. And so, in a very real way, just like we're building an equanimity of acceptance and presence and non-judging awareness with our internal work, we're developing an equanimity of kindness and feeling the other in empathy. And when we do this specifically, right, specifically when it's kindness and empathy that we are practicing all day long, all the time, because again, it becomes our state. It becomes our trait instead of the state that we achieve in practice. This sort of equanimity becomes, as I like to look at it, the backdrop of our lives. Right? So everything, the whole world looks like kindness and compassion. That's not to say that kindness and empathy and kindness are not coming back to us in everywhere we look, but everywhere we see, or in every interpersonal interaction we see or we engage in, we do so in this field of kindness and empathy. Now, the reason I'm saying this, and this is really the important thing, the whole real thesis of this whole episode here today, that I'm finally getting to at the 9.5 minute mark, why this is important is because against this backdrop, right, we're going to see something that's really important. As we're meeting each moment and each person within each moment with this trait of kindness, And with the skill of empathy, which is the ability to feel the other, and again, there's different types of empathy, but that's really the essence of empathy, is all about feeling the other. Whether we're feeling their, resonating with their feeling of their emotions, or we're taking their, perspective, or we're sort of thinking things through like them, right? Or if we're showing empathic concern or empathic joy. So this is what I'm getting to. You see, when we do this, when we meet the world with this, again, I look at it as an equanimity that no matter what's going on, no matter who it is, no matter what the situation, I am steady and I am always meeting the moment with this kindness and this empathy. Well, then I notice when there is suffering present. And I notice this more readily and more easily and more clearly. And ultimately, sorry, I just brushed my teeth as I always do before these episodes and I have a little dry mouth. Pardon me. But ultimately, this becomes something we notice for ourselves and for everyone else, including people that we don't necessarily care for, right? Including people that have done us wrong, who have caused us some kind of suffering on our own. Now, this is a very, very important, so let me pause here and talk about this for a second, okay? Because this is really, really important, because the same applies with kindness. And the same applies with empathy, that if we start out with the people who are, easy, if you will, to show these qualities to, right? The people who are, friends of ours, the people who are neutral people, right? Who are, just the people who we meet out there in the grocery stores and the post offices and the banks and all that kind of stuff, right? And then we're also taking in what we might consider a negative person in our lives, right? It's somebody who is, difficult, but we never, ever, ever start with that person who's really hurt us, right? We start with the person who was, rude in the grocery store, the person who cut us off on the street, as we were driving down the road, no harm was done. It was not really a big deal. Kind of forgot about it a little while, use that person. And we practice kindness and kindness and empathy towards those people. And ultimately, we are able then to have a care for their suffering as well as our own, right? Because sometimes we're the one who is in that negative space. When we get, upset with ourselves and we get, frustrated, or we feel like we've let ourselves down or let somebody else down, right? And that guilt that we feel and the shame that we feel, well, that's all forms of suffering. And in those moments when we're hating on ourselves, it's really hard to notice that as a form of suffering. And so this is, again, I want you to understand the reason I'm talking about it this way is because it is an evolving process. It starts very small, but eventually, like, there is nobody in the world who I can't feel kindness and compassion towards. And this also opens us up to the understanding and to the deep understanding through non-judging awareness that, we can separate the person from the person's actions. I got into a bit of a kerfuffle on Facebook a while back, when I started talking about this, because people cannot wrap their heads around this very easily. But it's very possible to feel contempt for someone's actions, yet feel compassion for the suffering that caused those actions. Because that's ultimately what we're talking about, folks, is that when we do things based on we're motivated by our emotions. We're motivated by the story in our mind. And so when we're in a place of suffering, right, the emotions and the story are telling us, and the tension in our body that we feel all this through is telling us that, you got to lash out. You got to, snap at somebody. You got to, insult somebody. You got to do some anger or whatever it is. Whatever that might be for you specifically. I'm describing what usually happened with me, right? And so as we build this skillfulness, we start to recognize that. And again, it's not just the compassion or the empathy and the kindness. It's just not just kindness, not just empathy. It's not just non-judging awareness. It's not just the self-awareness of my body, emotions, and thoughts. It's all of it, right? It all sort of culminates in this generalized skillfulness that lets us see things like this, right? That lets us see that when people are in a place of pain and suffering, it motivates their words, their decisions, their actions, just like it does for me. When I'm in a place of really not feeling well, generally speaking, I get more critical. I get more, in the past, it would have been more bossy and more, sharp toned and more, prone to insult or prone to confrontation. It wasn't that was the core of who I am. That was never the case, and neither is it for you, neither is it for anyone else. And this is an important understanding of humanity and biology, is that they've done extensive tests. I mean, neuroscientists have done extensive tests on this that unambiguously show that nearly every single human being, and when I say nearly, I mean aside from those who are, disorder, like there's a developmental physiological issue, right? But outside of that, or within, outside of that far, polar end of the spectrum, which means 99.9% of people come into this world with a basic innate goodness. And again, this is not woo-woo. This is not, although Buddha said this too, but it's not woo-woo. It's science. This has been shown through exhaustive experiments, using 6-month-old children, 9-month-old children, where they're measuring the very slight dilation of pupils and the very slight respiratory changes. And they're showing a kind puppet that gives a gift and gives a kiss on the cheek and talks nice. And then they have a mean puppet that takes the gift away and gives a growl at and the kids every single one of them gravitates towards the kind. So we are wired for this, right? There's nobody who came into the world as just a bad person. At least nobody you've probably ever met. Right? And this is true for even the most horrible people in the world. And so the reason why they are horrible people now is because not because of who they are or what they are, but more because of what has happened to them throughout the time of their lives. Just like you, just like me. And I became someone who was very angry all the time. I became someone who was mean and completely impatient and just always angry. That wasn't who I was, in my essence, but that's who I became through years of, childhood trauma and then chronic stress through, complex PTSD and all that stuff that happened, right? That's what made me into that person. And lo and behold, here I am, the same body, I'm the same guy, and now I'm none of those things. I never get angry. I mean, I get angry sometimes, but I never express it the way I used to. I'm never mean. I'm never dehumanizing of people in stores and stuff like that. It's completely the opposite. I come into stores and the cashiers light up. They're like, "Oh, hey, it's nice to see you." And we have a little talk and it's beautiful. Even when they're slow and even when it's frustrating. And this is because of the ability to notice the suffering. And even if you're not noticing suffering happening right now, right? Even if you're just noticing that, wow, this person's being really mean right now, you notice that is coming from a place of suffering, right? And so why is all this important? Okay? Because when we experience suffering, right, whether it's the suffering of someone else or it's the suffering of ourselves, when we experience that suffering, right, that is, again, when it's from someone else, it's like that's That's why they're doing everything they're doing. And understanding also that that's who is also receiving whatever I'm going to say or do. Right. So in a moment like that, if I see somebody being very mean, right, I know again that that's coming from a place of suffering. And therefore, I also know that whatever I say to this person, however I act towards this person, they are going to perceive my words and my actions through their suffering, which means that I know that they're going to be defensive. They're going to be, chaotic. They're going to be rigid. There's all kinds of things that I know about how this person is going to hear the words that I speak. So that allows me to be much more intentional about what I am going to say, right? Maybe I don't try to correct somebody right now because ultimately what we realize is that the suffering is the only thing that's kind of real in this moment, right? Everything else is just kind of coming from the suffering. So the words that they say and the actions that they do and the way they, maybe punch a wall or slam a door or something like that, that is not coming from their essence. That's coming from their suffering. So it's not, nothing else except the suffering is true and real in this moment. Now, when it comes to our own suffering, which is where self-compassion comes in, right? Because the concept of compassion, the etymology of compassion is from the Latin root of a phrase that means to suffer with. Right. So that's what compassion is. It's about feeling the suffering that, and again, feeling it through the observation and the understanding of the actions. Right. Like seeing that, oh, man, that person said something mean. The answer is not to be mean back. The answer is to and again, sometimes the answer is just to avoid the person. I don't need to, that's not my, my fight to fight here. It's not my job to necessarily take action for somebody. But there's lots of times where we need to interact with people. Right. And these people, in our lives, our friends, our loved ones, our colleagues, our coworkers, on and on and on, the grocery store clerks, the police officers, the bus drivers, everybody out there in the world, right, that we're interacting with. Right? We don't want to just avoid everyone who's in a bad mood, right? Because that creates a very limiting life, right? Or limited life. And so the idea then is, how can I enmesh with all of these people, even though some of them are suffering right now, right? And so the way we do that is we first understand that suffering, and then our words and our actions can be geared towards, somehow supporting and somehow easing that suffering so that the behavior changes. Instead of saying, hey, don't talk to me like that, right? We can say, hey, it feels like you're something's going on. Did you want to talk about something? I mean, is there anything I can help you with? Because I can tell that something's wrong. You want to go get a cup of coffee? You want to sit for a minute? You want to take a walk? You want to go get a breath of fresh air? Can I get you a glass of water? And again, it's not your job to do anything, but when necessary or when appropriate, you can do something. But the only way you can do something is when you're showing up with this kindness, empathy, and compassion. Because otherwise we miss it. Otherwise it's just somebody being a jerk. And that's a jerk, so I'm going to be a jerk back to them. And then just everybody's fighting with each other, right? Now again, this also applies to our own experience, as I started to say a few minutes. Pardon my digression again. But with ourselves, it becomes even more clear and more evident to us that in a moment of suffering, the only thing that's real in that moment is the suffering itself. Let me explain what I mean by that. So when we're going through something, again, this is when we feel suffering, when we're struggling in any given moment, right? In almost every circumstance, what we want to do really quick, there's one of two things we do. Either we try to get out of this as fast as possible, get to feeling better again, whatever it takes, or and or we try to assign blame. Like, whose fault is this? How did I get to this point? Who is responsible? Even if that who is me, right? But again, this is not the stuff that's real. Like, because every, idea that you have to get out of it, and every idea that you have of who might be responsible for coming here, for getting us here, is coming through that same suffering. And so it's cloudy and it's confused and it's unreasonable. It's chaotic and it's rigid and it's because it's coming from a place of suffering. And so what we realize then is that the only thing that is real and true is the suffering itself. And then we recognize that therefore I can attend to the suffering itself, and everything else sort of takes care of itself after that. Right? Because if I soothe and ease the suffering, well, then the ideas of what to do next change. The ideas of even the worthiness of blaming someone change. Just like it changes the way I talk to somebody else who's going through. And of course, it changes the way I talk to myself in that moment as well, right? Of course, that's a big part of it. I choose words and tone with myself that is supportive and kind and caring. Not the words of, you stupid, what the heck's wrong with you, Art? How could you be so stupid? You are just such an idiot. I can't believe you're even still living at this point, right? Like, how can you even feed yourself, you idiot? Right? We don't use those words anymore. Just like we don't use those words with other people when we see that they're suffering, because we know that that's not going to help anything. It's not going to get us to any kind of reasonable place. It's only going to increase the suffering. And it's only going to propel and prolong this agony that we're all experiencing. And so that's why it's so important to practice these things. It's so important to cultivate this skillfulness. Because again, it becomes it's not like, and I swear this is intense. I mean, it's not like I have to sit there and remind myself, Art, don't be mean, be kind, remember the suffering. It's nothing like that. It's the most natural, flowing, and intuitive process. And folks, it's wonderful. It really is wonderful, because again, it's how you're showing up, right? And what you're bringing into this present moment. Now, that doesn't mean that you always have to be the bubbly, kind, nice guy. I mean, I mentioned that in the grocery store, but because I'm just friendly, and so people enjoy that. People enjoy feeling somebody who feels them, who cares, right? That's just what that is. But you don't always have to be like the life of the party or something like that, right? That's not what this is about either. There's plenty of times where I'm suffering. I actually I'm just finishing up an ebook about all this kind of work, and in the last chapter is on self-compassion, and one of the things is like, this doesn't mean that life stops when we're suffering and practicing self-compassion, right? We can't do that. It's not like we can close the blinds and curl into bed for days at a time. That's going to disrupt life and cause more suffering, right? So it's and so I wrote that I've written the entire first draft of this chapter with tears welling up in my eyes because of some stuff that I'm going through right now. Right? So it is absolutely not to say that you don't get to feel sadness and that you don't get to, sort of hold, like you get to be in a tough place if you need to be in a tough place, right? If you need to take some time to, be alone and take care of yourself, you're allowed to do that, right? You don't have to, kindness and empathy and compassion are not really about the actions. It's about the way we process things. So again, it's not to say that your actions have to show kindness and show compassion and show empathy all the time. If you're not in that place where that is coming, well, then that's your own suffering, right? And you get to to focus on that, even while you're doing your job and driving your car and doing all the life stuff that we have to do. I hope that makes sense. Just like, the action is not like when I watch it. Yeah, I don't have a TV anymore, but when I used to watch TV a lot, I'd watch the news, and you'd see like a flood or a hurricane or a tornado damage or something. And you see people's houses just destroyed, and just, you feel how hard that must be for them. So that's compassion, is that feeling how hard. That's the empathy and the compassion that's happening in you. That doesn't mean that you have to run out to your car and drive down to Florida and start swinging hammers to help people rebuild their houses. That's not what I'm able to do. I mean, sure, usually I hop on the phone and send $5 to the relief effort and mutual aid and stuff like that. That's something I can do, and often I do. But even that is not the compassion. The compassion is what drives me to do that. The compassion and the kindness and the empathy are the sense of caring that's happening inside me, that then promotes action, promotes words, promotes decisions that are towards that way of behavior, right? So it's not the behavior of being like, oh, I'm so kind and everything's happy and right? That's not what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about something that's coming from within, right? I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I want to hear from you. Okay, I want to hear from you anyway, but if it doesn't make sense, please let me hear from you. And once again, I forgot, but I'm going to tell you here now. Please like, share, subscribe. I actually got somebody made a comment on the Apple podcast the other day, and I'm so happy. And you know who you are, and I'm so happy you found us. It's so amazing to have you here. This is someone who you can look at the review over there on the Apple podcast app. But this is somebody who remembers some of my videos that I was doing with TikTok for a long time. I did a whole bunch of videos. A couple of them even went viral. Like I had one that had something like 15,000 views and like a couple thousand likes. And it was about kindness. But I just got burnt out with the TikTok. It just became too much because, not only is it the recording and producing the content, but the interactions, it was just like I was spending 3 or 4 hours a day, and I just don't have that time to spend. So this is much more the format. So I'm just so happy that you were able to find us. I'm thinking about going on TikTok, just making a video to tell people to find me here. But anyway, if you're still listening, I would really appreciate you liking, subscribing, commenting, rating, doing anything you can that's available on the platform you're consuming this on to help promote this. Because not for my own ego, right? Again, it's like, I thought it was cute that I had a couple of videos that went 15,000 or something, but it's not like, I'm not like, oh, I'm valid now. Like I'm way past that. So it's not for my ego that I'm asking this. It's for more people that we can help here, right? Because listen, I have people who have contacted me after listening to this. We've never done any direct work with each other, but they've told me how their lives have changed just from listening. And I'm talking about big time changes in their lives, changes that could add decades onto their lives. Decades of truly enjoyable and fulfilling experiences. So there's a lot of people who need this stuff, folks, and the more you can do to help me promote this on, the iTunes, the podcast apps as well as YouTube, the more you can help me promote it, the more people come in, the more chance we have that somebody could, we can make a really, really big deal for somebody. All right, so share it, tell people about it. Please help me get some more eyeballs and eardrums on this work. Okay. All right, everybody. I wish you well. I'll be back. I might do another episode tomorrow. I know this week I didn't get to do any because, as I said, I was going through some really difficult stuff, and I needed to, take some time and, sort of minimize and be gentle with myself. So I definitely off my pace, but I might have some time tomorrow, and we'll see. All right. All right, folks. I wish you well. I'll be back again soon. Take care.